Hello, little helpers. Many of you know that I lost my cat Scipio a couple months ago. And that grieving process was really hard and really unique in certain ways. And so Kibby and I talked about doing an episode on pets. Both why pets can be so great and what we know about pets and their relationship to mental health, and also pet loss and that grieving process. Kibby also had a beloved pet die a few years ago. I'm sure many of you have as well. We are usually destined to outlive our pets, and so this is something that all pet owners go through eventually, and yet not something that's super talked about in relationship to mental health. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to do this episode. Kibby, what kind of comes to mind when you think about pets and your own mental health? Have they been helpful?
I wish it weren't just... I wish there were a different word than just pets, right? Like pet. Mm-hmm. When I think of pet, I think of like my pet hamster when I was five, right? When I had Maya, who was my, my first dog, my first pet. She was a beautiful white Shiba Inu. She was like famous among my friends because she was so fat and lazy and independent. Mm-hmm. Like she just wanted to be on the couch. She wanted to eat her food. She did not want to go on walks, and she just did what she wanted. But it wasn't, the word pet doesn't really capture it. It was like a life companion. It was like it just felt more of like an extension of myself. So when we think about pets and mental health, it's like, it's such a special relationship. It's such this unique bond with something living that like, it's almost like this pure form of love that feels unconditional, feels different than any other kind of relationship you have in your life with like other humans. So for mental health, I think it's a huge thing. It's a huge component of our lives when we have like a animal companion, I'll say. How about that?
Yeah, I kind of don't even know where to start with this. I mean, Scipio was my cat who died, and he was also my first pet in the sense that Paul and I got two other animals before Scipio, but they were shared, and then they went to Paul when we broke up. And Scipio was the first animal that it was like designated mine. Of course, after childhood, I had pets growing up all through childhood, and it's like this animal that's so special and so bonded, and it's yours to take care of. And yet the decisions around death and euthanasia are very different than what decisions around human death would be, in part because you know you're going to outlive this animal. And it's not a person, and financial concerns do come in, and that comes in with people too, but it's just like, I'm still kind of messed up from the decisions to end his life, and we can talk about that later, but I'm grappling with like, he was at once this like love of my life, like very, very, very special with me, got me through like my breakup, started my new life with me. I felt like this very soul bonded experience with him. And I kind of had to be real with myself around his death and not pour thousands and thousands of dollars into keeping him alive. And that's a very weird thing to hold at the same time. Mm-hmm.
What does Scipio mean to you? Like what for you, what did having Scipio mean for your mental health?
Well, for one thing, he made it a lot easier for me to live alone because I wasn't alone. So I felt more comfortable, moving out and kind of striking out on my own. He was just a constant companion. He had a very strong personality. And so I felt very bonded to him. Like we had a real relationship. It wasn't just like a hamster where I'm like, okay, I'm taking care of this cute thing. But man, poor hamsters are like really getting,
I love my hamsters. They're my buddies.
Yeah, they're getting shit talked in this episode though. Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like I had a very, real relationship with him. And he was a very complicated pet to own. And so, looking at there's actually a lot of research about pets and mental health, or very accessible research. And I was noting, like the effects of pets on mental health. I was like, oh yeah, that one, all these make sense. And then the downsides too. I was like, yep.
What were the things that hit? What things that resonated with their benefits?
Yeah. So one really interesting thing that does not so much apply to me, but it's that people who have greater attachment to their pets often have worse mental health. That is mediated, though. So that doesn't mean that pets are bad for mental health. It means that those people who are like really, really attached, like push around their pets in like strollers or can't be without them, or just really, really strongly bonded, often have poor mental health.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. And what's your guess? Or why that makes sense?
So, I guess that was a judgment. I guess it just called up a picture of someone who's very isolated, who this is like their only attachment in life. And might be substituting it for something that's like a void in other kinds of relationships. Like they don't really have friends or children or another satisfying partner. So like their pets become the substitute for it.
Yep, that's exactly it. So we see people who have more insecure attachment types attaching more strongly to pets because they are a proxy for human connection. And so that kind of begs the question, like, do pets serve as avoidance of human connection, or are they basically better than nothing, right? So it's like the pets are still really good for, like, they're not prohibiting you from forming human relationships. And I don't know that the jury is out on that yet, but one thing we do know is that one of the advantages of pets for mental health is that especially pets like dogs can make you more social because they force you out of the house. They make you to go to dog parks, dog walks. People like, if you've, I don't know if you experienced this with Mindy, but people always want to stoop down and like, touch the dog, pet the dog, and play with it. And so that's a good way to, even if you're not necessarily making friends, just get some human contact in your day.
Interesting.
Yeah. But we've seen things like kids who are pretty shy, like who have social anxiety. They typically respond better to emotional, like therapy support animals than like a therapy support person.
Oh, that reminds me. I remember bringing Maya to doggy daycare, and there was one little Cocker Spaniel that was being trained to be a therapy dog, and the therapy dog, so sweet. The only training he got was to sit still for like 30 minutes at a time without doing anything. Oh my gosh. Because he was going to help kids who have learning disabilities, and the kids would read books to the dog, and he's just supposed to sit there and listen. Isn't that sweet?
That is the cutest thing I mean, as long as the dog is happy sitting there, like rooted to the pavement for 30 minutes, but yeah, that's really cute. Yeah, I mean, and it kind of loops back into other benefits, like people experience their pets as these non-judgmental listeners, confidants. They're not gonna insult you. They're not gonna like judge you. They love unconditionally, supposedly. And so I mean, they're a good counterpoint from like human relationships, which are more complicated and critical, judgmental, etc. So it can really be a nice thing to have as well. Again, part of me worries like, okay, but you don't want to rely on that too much because you do need to accept the complexity of human relationships as well. But if your option is no relationships or pets, then take pets.
Yeah, and I guess you could say that really about any coping mechanism or anything, right? Like you can have, of course, romantic relationships or best friends in humans are important, but if you are obsessed with like one person or you don't have flexibility around that I could see that being a problem. But I remember really old, at this point, there was probably old data. I haven't looked at the updated research, but there was strong evidence that having a pet prolonged elderly's life. Ooh. To be able to, and also plants too. But it's the idea that I mean, there could be many explanations for that, but the one that I remember was that the idea of like caring for something, right? Like having a purpose,
Yes.
making sure that, you know, it probably regulates your schedule and routine during the day. You have to, if you have a dog, you have to take it on walks. So you are getting outside and walking. And I think that humans in general need a purpose, and there's a lot of research around how giving and caring for something else is beneficial to our mental health in many ways, right? So
Yes.
just having like something that relies on you for their livelihood is, you know, a responsibility and a burden, but it's also like incredibly meaningful.
Yep, and the research supports that. I mean, there's two sides to it, right? One is like the meaning that is derived from caring for something. And I certainly experienced that. And the other part is the behavioral activation element, where the pet gets you out of bed, especially dogs. I find it hard not, like when I have a borderline patient, I'm always like, get a dog. and I know I can't just be like, seriously, go get a dog, because there are concerns that you have to take into account. But, you know, I mean, I had a friend with a pretty severe BPD, and her dogs really saved her life in multiple ways. I mean, they were her reason for living. And I have a patient who lists her cat as her reason for living. But those dogs especially, I mean, you know, I'm a cat person, but like dogs get you out of the house, which is a real advantage, and meeting people. And so, if you're someone who struggles to get out of bed, or you just cannot, you're not getting any exercise, any fresh air, any vitamin D, then a dog is really good for that.
Yeah. I remember first getting Maya. Oh my gosh. Oh, she was so cute. I got her when I just graduated college, and my dad was sick with cancer. And I remember getting her, you know, during that process. And I was like, I don't know, whatever it was, 20, 21. And she was so cute. She was like a little white wolf. You know, she has like this tiny little thing with a curly tail and little pointy ears and all white. And I didn't realize like what I was taking on. You know, you just get a pet and you're like, you know, oh, this is going to be fun. But it just really, it really is like the kind of the entry to what it's like to parent. It's like this first experience of, oh, I can't just do whatever. I can't just think only of my needs. I have to take care of something. And
Right.
I remember that part of your brain that it wakes up or is created when you care for something. And it's like, oh, now I'm always thinking about her in the back of my mind. Like, how long I've been out of the house. Do I need to go back and walk her? Do I need to, you know, does she need anything? Is she well fed? Is she well, you know, there's always just like a part of you that's, you know, remembering that there's something that needs you. And I remember that being a transition, but I thought it was a really good one for me. It helped me grow up a little bit. It helped me, just not just be totally, let's see, like floating and detached in my own self. Totally. It was like something that literally grounded me. Yeah, it's like it tethered me to like earth.
It's interesting. I mean, the first 2 years of dog ownership are the toughest, and it's probably that dogs are really tough in their first few years, and then B, it is that transition. It's like, you know, being a new mom, but like, you know, not that extreme, obviously. But you're right. It's that first kind of introduction to, oh shit, I'm tethered. I have to account for this thing. I can't stay out all night. I have this pet needs to, you know, it needs to pee. Cats don't give you that quite as much.
Yeah, how do you deal with that, given that you love being untethered?
Well, cats don't really tether you very much. I mean, they're very independent. They use a bathroom indoors. They eat kind of when they want to eat. They manage to save up their food to an extent. You know, if you really forget to feed them, they can just eat the mice that are in your apartment, especially if the apartment is my apartment. Sissy, I caught her playing with 4 separate mice over the last 24 hours. Isn't that nice? 4 separate fucking mice that I had to rescue and put outside.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so thanks Icon Apartments for that. There's always something. They are, they're just, I struggle because of the format of my life right now. Like when I first got Scipio, I was in a relationship and I lived with him. And so Scipio had like theoretically a pretty stable life and he was always going to. So I didn't get a pet when I was single, but then Scipio showed a lot of stress around changing locations and like me leaving. And so what happened was when Paul and I broke up and I moved into a new apartment, I had to start dating again. And I started dating somebody who lives 30 minutes away and is a single dad. And whose house he was renting does not allow pets. So then I was faced with this really problematic choice of like, do I leave Scipio alone over the weekends, knowing how much he struggles with this? So then I got Sissy to keep him company. And now she's alone. And the whole point of getting a second cat was so that they would never be alone. And it makes me feel like a pretty shit owner. And I just try to mitigate that as much as possible. Like if it's going to be longer than 2 days, making sure we come and visit. Always making sure there are like a tons of toys and a cat tower and a clean litter box. But and then like, constantly kind of counting down the months until I'll be living with Jason and she can have a stable life for the rest of her life. Mm-hmm. But all of that immensely played into the guilt I felt at his death because it all played in. But yeah, I mean, I get a pet sitter if I go. Like the cats really are not, they're just not as intensive as dogs. And that's why like when people are really depressed, if they have the financial resources, I like it when they get dogs.
Yeah, it's catch-22. There have been circumstances I've seen where someone gets a dog and in the wake of a breakup or in the wake of some other kind of, loss or something, and they might not be like fully ready to, getting a dog, especially, it takes a lot of work in the beginning, right? A puppy it takes a lot of work. And sometimes I've seen that if people just get a pet just to soothe the void and without like putting in the work that's necessary because they're not ready for that can be tough because then the dog is like untrained or misbehaves or it just makes it a little bit more complicated.
That's not a good situation for the dog either.
Yeah.
So those are some of the downsides of pets on mental health is if they have behavioral issues, if it's too tight of a financial situation, if you're going to feel a lot of guilt and regret for not properly taking care of your animal. And that's especially true with dogs. Like cats they can have behavioral issues, and Scipio had maybe the worst in some ways. But they're probably not going to like ruin your house or bark all night long, right? Like they're probably not going to wake up the neighbors or prevent you from sleeping. And they can't do too much physical harm. I mean, cats can hurt you, but they're not going to like rip your face off.
No, this is why I'm not a cat fan, okay? And this is why, because the cats that I've seen with behavioral issues, you're like petting them, you think everything's great, they lull you into a sense of intimacy and security, and then bam, they like bite you or whip out their needle-like claws.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh, man, it's like a roller coaster.
No.
Yeah.
Dogs just make more sense to me because I think that, just over the history of, dog ownership or domestication of animals, like dogs were used as, like working, right? They're used for hunting. They're used for like herding the cattle, right? It's just, there's just such like a beautiful like relationship of humankind and dogs because like we have good eyesight and they have good smell and hearing. So it's like we are a super unit, right? Together, like as a pack, we like it makes sense why we're together.
This podcast episode is going to devolve into a cats versus dogs debate for a little while. Because here's the thing. Cats, again, are like being in a really exciting relationship in your 20s where it's like a roller coaster and you like never fully know if they love you. But actually, I think that's a little bit unfair. Sissy cuddles with me constantly throughout the day. I know she's obsessed with me, but it's not that kind of like obsequiousness that dogs have. Here are dogs, and by the way, I love both animals, so this is kind of ridiculous to me, but dogs are smelly and they're annoying. And that's my primary issue with them.
Oh, is that based on the research that we're sharing? It's just smelly and annoying?
It's scientifically proven that cats smell delicious and dogs are smelly and annoying because they fucking bark all the time. They run around. They chew all your shit up. None of your food is safe. None of your pillows are safe. None of your shoes are safe.
That's true. I remember Maya would just be like, she was just like a barrel of white fur. She was very large, and as much as I try to exercise her, she was having none of it. But what she would do is that she would spend all day lying on couch, just like luxuriating. You know, she was a woman who knew how to be comfortable. So she'd be on the couch all day, and then I'd go out. And immediately, as soon as I would leave the house, she would get up and she would go and knock the trash can over and eat everything inside it. So I would come home to trash everywhere and her like covered in like sauces and whatever. And then she would know, she's so smart, she would know how to look guilty. Like she would, like, her ears would flap back. She was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But she did it every time.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. Cats can't help it. They have knives in their feet. I mean, what are they supposed to do? Of course you're going to get scratched sometimes, but that's the extent of it. And they have little vibrators inside of them. All right, should we get back to the mental health content?
Agree to disagree. Animals have benefits.
Yeah. Animals have benefits as long as you're able to actually take care of them. So do your research first.
Yeah. I think also there was this rise, now it's kind of a decline in the idea of like emotional sport animals, right? Like especially, you know, people wanting to travel with them and everything, and I'm all for that, you know. I'm a big fan. I know it got kind of out of hand when people started bringing peacocks and snakes and pigs on awesome. Planes. Yeah, that's when it really went downhill. Yeah. But I do know that actually having a pet can be really beneficial to your mental health because you have to focus and be present on something, right? Like having something, we use as a skill in dialectical behavior therapy sometimes, where a good thing to do to combat like rumination or catastrophizing or just kind of getting lost in your thoughts is to really intentionally be with your animal, with your pet. Yeah. And as you're saying, it's not this human relationship where there's a lot of complicated social dynamics. It could be just something very present and simple and sensual in the way that you just are cuddling with them or petting them or just using your senses to really be present with something is hugely, it's been great for a lot of patients that struggle with their emotions or getting lost in their thoughts.
Yeah, there were some quotes from a paper I was reading that, you know, it really does disrupt that ruminative cycle because you just you have something that is claiming your attention. So it can interrupt a lot of processes. And also, I'm kind of iffy on this one, but dogs can be good for PTSD because they offer that sense of enhanced security. A little bit of a safety object there. And I would think that barking could set off startle responses, but in general, like, having an increased sense of safety, you're not the only one guarding the house, can be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I know that dogs have been used for PTSD, sometimes veteran PTSD treatment, because it's something that is there to give you comfort, but also protection, like a sense of protection. So yeah, it seems like the mounting evidence is dogs are amazing and that cats are unpredictable, scary, aloof, and dangerous is what the science shows.
I guess they just really love me because I experience them as incredibly cuddly and comforting and just wanting to be around me constantly.
That's what they want you to think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's effective. I'm happy to live my life doing cat spittings.
So tell us a little bit about losing Skippy. I mean, this is getting into this sadder part, but I think that the talking about the losses, for me at least, highlights what is so important about pets in our lives, right? In terms of a mental health perspective.
Yeah. So this was the other downside of pet ownership on mental health, is that the loss is quite painful. So I can talk about my experience with Scipio. It maps on very well with what research has found. So you lost Maya in somewhat similar circumstances in that it was sudden and unexpected, and she was still young.
Ugh, yeah.
So basically, what happened was that Scipio, for the entire time I had him, had a peeing problem. Where starting when he was a kitten, when I would go back and forth between Paul's house and my house, he would start peeing on my bed. So I stopped doing that because I figured it stressed him out. And he stayed purely at Paul's house. And during that time, he didn't really have too many problems until we went on vacation. Other than that, he did not show any signs of stress. He was pretty laid back cat. And we had another cat who was awesome, and they got along super well. It became very easy to think that he was revenge peeing. And my sister had a cat who did this, and so I don't even know if that's a thing, to be honest, but I remember looking it up and saying yeah, sometimes when cats are upset, they'll pee. So the problem was that when I moved into this apartment after breaking up with Paul, that behavior really resumed. And I thought that I was trying everything. Now, in retrospect, I wasn't trying the things that actually would have helped, which really fucking sucks. But he seemed to, for instance, stop peeing when I got rid of the feather down comforter. Then he resumed peeing. So then it was okay, every time I get a new comforter, he stops peeing on that for a few months. So it's maybe he pees and then he gets used to his scent and then he just enjoys it. I got him a second cat. I got him a lot of toys. I tried bringing him to Jason's when I went over to Jason's, but then he would pee when he got back. So it was oh yeah, I got him a gigantic litter box. I gave him 2 litter boxes. I got him a litter I thought that he would like better. I experimented with various litters. Tried keeping the litter very clean. And it seemed like things would help for a little while. But ultimately, the cat was seemed like the picture of health. Glossy fur, very, a good weight, good energy levels, etc. One day, I put essential oils out. And I kind of knew this was a little bit risky, but it was basically if they're far away, if they can get away from them, it's not going to be a big deal. So I put them out, and then he immediately started having symptoms of essential oil poisoning. Which was he was walking very slowly, he was hiding under the bed. And so basically within at first, and he was vomiting. And what's tough about vomiting is that cats have hairballs a lot, and so vomiting's not all that unusual. But this was repeated, right? So I called poison control, talked to them, and then they sent me to the emergency vet. And basically, I was expecting about $1,000 bill for an IV to get rid of essential oil poisoning. They said, no, it's not that at all. He has a urinary blockage, which meant that he had built up stones or material in his urethra and couldn't pee. And when you can't pee, the kidneys start peeing gets rid of toxins in the body. When you can't do that, the kidneys start shutting down because they're overwhelmed. They are filling with toxins, and so then the bloodstream becomes filled with really high potassium and all sorts of terrible things. And cats die very, very quickly from this. So the point is that I thought he was normal sick, and I was beating myself for a stupid essential oil decision, but I thought he was gonna be fine and I could afford it. Instead, I'm told pretty immediately, this is going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and we don't know if it'll fix him temporarily, but he's at kind of a high risk for recurrence in the first week. And he's also at an elevated risk for recurrence over a lifetime. And this is common in male cats. This wasn't a very unusual diagnosis. And this really
What was it called?
was a shock.
What was the condition?
It was a urinary blockage, or urethral. I don't even know why I'm like not remembering the exact scientific term, but
fine.
Yeah, it was
curious.
It was a urinary obstruction. That was what it was called. And I almost paid for it, but like, understand that like I make under $40,000 as a grad student, and that's not going to change in the near future. And my like rent is really expensive, and inflation has been terrible, and so basically like financially not in the best place. And I could have theoretically paid, and I would have paid for the surgery if I thought that this will make him good for the rest of his life.
Yep.
But instead they're like, you're going to have to get him a new diet, which is fine, but it would have been expensive. It might recur, and you have to keep his stress levels low. And then I told them about the peeing problem and how I had thought it was behavioral. Well, it turns out, they said he probably had a genetic condition where when he became stressed, his bladder became inflamed and he started peeing outside of the litter box. And so I looked at my lifestyle and when I would possibly be able to give him a better life. And I don't even know where I'm going to be next year because of internship, which is a part of the PhD process that I'm very resentful towards. And so basically the point is like I could have to relocate him again, like in a smaller apartment if I had to move to New York, for instance. And I was like, I don't know that I can reasonably bring down this cat's stress levels in the next 2 to 3 years. And I certainly cannot afford 2 of these surgeries. So I had about an hour to make the decision. I decided to put him down. And that felt very fast. I couldn't take more time because this was something that was going to kill him. I mean, imminently. And also he was in pain. But, I think like, and like I talked to my sister who has a lot of money and she was like, you cannot spend this amount of money on a cat. Like you just can't do it. That would like be so incredibly irresponsible. So I was like swayed by that. And yeah, I mean, I do think it would have been a financially irresponsible decision, but like the problem is that when you get home, then without this cat that has meant so much to you, and I lost him in the prime of his life. He was only 3 years old. It's just like horrific to think that you chose money over this not just something that you love, but something that you signed up to take care of and nurture through life. And it's really interesting with a pet because a pet isn't quite like a child because actually it's its own being. Like they survive out in the wild by themselves. It's an adult animal. But, it doesn't necessarily know how to do that because it's been living with you. And so there was a shitload of guilt over like, how dare I, choose my own finances over this responsibility of like shepherding him through life, along with the guilt of losing something that I loved. And, like the other consideration was that it was really hard living with him. Like I was always doing laundry. I was always sleeping in wet sheets. Not from the pee, but from like doing laundry and not drying enough. I was always dealing with litter. He was always peeing in the plants. I was always cleaning up. Like plants were always dying. He just was not an easy cat. And so that kind of played in too. And I was about to move in with Jason, and Jason's a clean freak. And I'm like, can I really justify spending all this money, like putting him through a stressful life, only to then stress out my partner because this is going to be like a lifelong behavioral issue? So I don't know. I mean, sometimes when I say it out loud, it's like, yeah, that was the right decision. But then, the amount of money was like on the cusp of like, I could have afforded it. Right. But, it would have been hard. And I don't really know how to cope with that sometimes of like, I could have chosen to save him.
Yeah. How has it been in the wake of that? Like what were ways that you've coped and ways that people have supported or not supported? Because I know that there was some like negative stuff that came out after, right? Like
yeah. I mean, okay, so there's like the acute stage, and then there's the the longer term piece. The acute stage, you were very helpful, like both like getting me cookies and dinner, because I was incapable of like I mean, two things happened. One, the euthanasia loan cost $1,000. So I already had to like fuck myself over financially just to like literally kill my cat. And so like you and Jason both got me food that lasted a week. I didn't have to worry about takeout. I could not have cooked. And so that was helpful. The other thing that was helpful was you telling me like, your job right now is to get through the next 24 hours. I don't care how you do it. You don't have to do it in a healthy way. Like if you need to like drink wine in a bathtub, just fucking do it. And you can say that to somebody who has otherwise healthy coping mechanisms, right? Like Kibby wasn't in danger of creating an alcoholic in me because I know how to manage alcohol. And so, you know, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to like a person with really unhealthy coping generally. But sometimes it really is just about getting through the first 48 hours and doing that through whatever mechanism you need to. So yeah, that's what I drank. I mean, I drank wine in the bathtub and ate Indian food in the bathtub and cookies in the bathtub and called. And then the other thing that was really helpful was like Jason, and this is another, oh my gosh, that's another thing. Okay. So Jason's wife died a long time ago, and he was very capable of like talking me through this. And the research shows, and so this is an interesting part of like pet death that can complicate grief, is that we don't have like ceremonies or traditions around pet loss. And so it can feel like pet loss is sort of an invalid grief. Like you should just get over it.
Interesting.
And so, you know, talking to my boyfriend whose wife died and him having me comfort me about my cat dying, I was very, very aware of like the huge discrepancy there. And he was very kind about saying like grief is grief, you know, like it, in many cases it's the same process. And, but I think him talking to me and, you know, one thing that he said that was really helpful, one thing that was really hard for me was looking back and being like, I factored in my cat's behavioral problems in the decision to euthanize him. So it felt like a selfish decision because I was like, oh, my life will be easier. And he's like, look, like when you have to make a decision like that, you have to attempt to get into what is essentially like reasonable mind. Like you kind of know what you're going to do and you have to find backup for, like you have to find, you have to recruit for it. Like, okay, I know what the right thing to do is here. Well, my emotions are not jumping on board. My emotions are telling me, no, don't do this. So like, I'm looking for any kind of munition, you know, to keep on my side. And so that really helped me relieve some of that grief because I was like, yeah, that actually does feel like what was going on. But yeah, I mean, I just vented and went in circles and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed for days. A really sweet follower on Instagram who had lost an orange cat brought me some orange mums to like keep in honor. And she's been going around like doing that for people because it helps her grieve her own loss. So yeah, I mean, I think like, yesterday, you know, with this mouse problem, I was thinking about how happy Scipio would be with the mice all around. And I was like, shit, I wish he were here. Like I regretted the decision in that moment. And I think going back and forth is something that I may be doing for a while, but I also tend to, I think, cope pretty well in general and like to get out of the acute stage in a pretty timely manner. So, you know, I wasn't at risk really of like going into a depression over this, but then, you know, you feel guilty for not crying and then you feel guilty, then you feel like a victim for crying. And so then there's that, like, that thing to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, the grief, there's nuances in the nuanced differences in the grief of a person versus a pet. But grief, as Jason said, grief is grief. And you know, there's that initial shock, and then there's like the waves of emotions, and then, you know, making meaning out of it, like you're saying. But it's tough with pets because unlike people, unlike a lot of situations with people, not all, a lot of pet losses are due to like your choice, right? Like most people have to make the choice to put down their pet. Even if it's like the doctor is basically saying this pet is going to die, like if it's like natural causes, you have to do it. You have to say yes to that.
Exactly.
And that is so in grief, of all kinds of losses, there's always this, not always, there's often this tendency to try to see if you could have control over it, like try to get control over it by thinking, what could I have done differently? What could I have done to prevent that? What, gosh, I wish I had done this, whatever, the what ifs. But that's even more the case with these pets because you actually did make the decision, right? And I've heard so many stories about people who've, had to funnel so much money into their care, into their pet's care, and then they're still sick or they still suffer. And it's especially painful to watch these pets suffer from medical conditions because like they don't know what's going on the same way we do. They could show pain or they could describe their experiences in certain ways, but they can't advocate for their own care, right? So it's just like you have so much responsibility over this pet's like suffering that it just adds that level of like, it adds that like guilt piece that I think might be missing from other different kinds of grief.
Yeah, I agree. And again, that role of you being the caretaker, I mean, those two things in conjunction are really hard. A lot of people said like, you ended his suffering, it was the right thing to do. And I'm like, I guess. Or his suffering was the last thing he ever knew. And that is just like the rest of his life was just suffering. Or, on the other part is like, I can't read his mind. And human beings very often choose to suffer instead of die. And I don't know how cats feel about that. I don't know if he would have rather felt like he had a permanent UTI than... Because I mean, that's essentially what it would have been, right? Like he would have felt like he had a UTI. If I had a UTI and someone said, "Would you rather keep going with this or die?" I'd probably say, "I'm going to keep the UTI." But I don't know. Like maybe it's easier because then I would know exactly what it is. And
were you affected at all by the negative comments? Like there were some people who were truly nasty, and I was really surprised by that.
Yeah, I mean. Okay, so basically what happened was I posted a fairly vulnerable post the day he died. An hour after he died. And let's say 60 people responded. 58 of them were incredibly kind. So, people were incredibly kind. 2 people were just truly disturbingly nasty. Was I affected? Not that much.
What did they say? Give a little snippet of it just for the...
Oh gosh, I wish I had brought my phone in here. Well, I had said in my post, like, I feel like a shit cat mom because, I chose basically finances over my cat. Now, that was oversimplifying it. I chose lots of things. But... they were like, you should feel like a shit cat mom. Choosing money over your cat, like, how dare you? It was something like that. I mean, two comments to the effect of like, you're a really shitty person. Yeah. You're a really bad cat mom. Like, you made the wrong decision. How could you do this? I mean, listen, if I hadn't been on The Bachelor 5 years ago and dealt with just so many comments like that, then I'd be more affected than I am. But I understand that there's going to be a percentage of people who are just going to choose to make you feel like shit. So sometimes I'm capable of sometimes the more extreme comments, you're like, all right, like, come on. You're gonna like, the most disturbing part about that was that they were willing to say that to someone who had literally just put their cat down. Yeah. Like the day of, they decided to make me feel like a bad person. You know what? Like I comforted myself somewhat being like, all right, well, I guess these people like really love animals. And that's good. That's nice. We need more people who really love animals. I mean, I'm like, I hope they're vegans, you know, like I hope that they regularly foster and adopt, and that they just responsibly put their pets down. You know, if they are like really suffering badly, they'll make that choice. But otherwise, I guess it's good that there are people out there that like take pet ownership that seriously. And you know, I thought I was one of them, and I don't know if I am or I'm not, because I don't know what the right thing to do was. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's always concerning when people choose to be evil to another. But
yeah, so a tip for everyone out there: don't troll people on social media if they've lost a pet.
Yeah, don't do that one. I would say the one of the number one things that helped though was that some veterinarians reached out to me on Instagram and told me that I made a very valid and reasonable choice. Yeah,
that is really helpful. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to really think about the different coping mechanisms. I mean, there's something that we read in this article. We'll put it on the website. It's called A Literature Review, Pet Bereavement and Coping Mechanisms. And reading through them, it was very similar to any other kind of grief, as we were talking about. It's isolation, you know, feeling alone, socially distant, or the opposite, social support, like finding other people who understand, and continuing bonds and memorialization, and religion or spirituality, and relationships with other animals. These are all kind of things that, you know, you do with any kind of loss, which is like either isolate yourself or reach out for help, turn to God or your religion or spirituality to understand and make sense and meaning out of the loss. Bonding and strengthening relationships with other animals and other people and things. And also like memorializing your pet.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that one thing that was mirrored. So in the literature, it said specifically like our culture does not have a way of memorializing lost pets, and I just heard that from a couple in the fertility center who just miscarried. He's like, our culture doesn't have a memorialization of miscarriage.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that really can leave people feeling like they don't know how much they're allowed to grieve. You know, I mean, one of the things I've been working with them and others is like, at what point is my grief normal? You know, if our society says it's not even worth a ceremony, right? It's not worth a formal acknowledgement, then am I something like weird about me that I'm this distraught? So yeah, I mean, I think that's what made it really sweet about the girl on Instagram with the mums. You know, like she was telling me to memorialize in a sense. She's like, yes, this is valid. Like, I'm going to help you memorialize. And then Jason, this whole time I've been holding this this pillow that has Scipio on it, like his face on it, that Jason made for me. And that was really sweet because I remember that first couple nights being like, I need to get an orange cat stuffed animal. And then without telling Jason that, he'd like gotten me this pillow so that I could like hug Scipio at night. And I actually don't cuddle him at night. I like prop him up in my room to feel like he's always there. Like he's got an expression on that is very like classic Scipio. And so I'm like, yeah, my two cats are in the room with me. But, yeah, basically the research has showed that this like ambiguity of like, how are we supposed to know when to stop grieving is distressful.
It is so interesting.
Distressing, sorry.
Yeah. No, I think maybe we should, you know, that could be the takeaway message, is that we should have we need a way to socially grieve, a social norm around grieving pets, right? Because I think you're right. When you have a ceremony, a tradition, that's a community's way of showing that like we all may experience this, and this is a way to publicly and communally recognize it, right? And
I think that could be nice. You know, it's funny thinking about it. I'm like, I would feel so foolish like doing a pet funeral, but at the same time, I'm like, but I was really upset.
Yeah.
And it's hard when you have an unexpected euthanasia, because they say, would you like to bring this corpse home with you? Or would you like to pay $100 to get the ashes back? Or, you know, or pay another, like, sorry, I think it was like $250 to get the ashes back, or $100 to like cremate. I went with the cremate option because I'm like, I don't know what to do with a fucking corpse of my cat. Like, I'm going to be so traumatized if I see this cat stiffen, you know? But that means that you just walk in one day thinking that your cat just needs a liquid IV, and you walk out day with just an empty carrier.
Oh,
you know, I mean, I was picking off his fur and trying to save it because I was like, this is seriously, like, this is all that exists of my cat. It's just some I remember that. Some like hairs.
Maybe you should do a memorial in some way.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Sissy and I can like sit outside and make a little like rock, like rock formation.
I definitely did that when Maya passed, and it helped a lot. I did a lot to cope with that. That was a really
tell us about that, because yours was horrible in a different way.
I don't want to give all the details because it's pretty so trigger warning. It's pretty upsetting, but Maya was amazing. She came with me through. She was like my adult companion, right? I grew into an adult with her. I lived in New York and Berlin and North Carolina. She came with me in all these places, all my adventures, right? So she really was like, it was me and her. You know, I remember the first day I moved to Berlin, it was just, I was so alone and so scared, but it was just me and Maya in like this rented apartment in Berlin on a mattress on the floor, and that's it. It was just like me and her together on this like new journey. So there's just one horrible time. I mean, she really liked to get into food, right? When I was like out of the house, and there was one time in Durham when I don't want to like blame anyone because like there's a series of accidents that led up to this, but my ex-husband left a bag of cookies on a table that was like, you know, reachable to her. Something that I normally know not to do, but like, you know, I don't think he knew. And we went out and came back and she wasn't in a normal spot. And I had this like sinking feeling, I remember, and calling her like, where is she? Where is she? And we found that she had gotten to the cookie bag and it was on her head, and she had an accident because I guess she couldn't see where she was going. She had an accident and died. So we found her, and just all the details about finding her, finding like your companion,
I can't imagine that part.
Like in like an undignified. She was such a regal woman. Like she was such a regal dog with, you know, dignity, and she did what she wanted, and she died alone without me in this horrible accidental way. And I just hope that there was no suffering. But I went into shock. I called our friend Caitlin. She came over immediately. And I remember that day of shock. Like I remember, I've had that shock experience before with trauma where it's like you see the memory over and over and over again, right? It just is like repeating in your head. And then there's moments of like not believing it's true, right? This kind of like disembodied, like what is happening. Yeah. Brought her to the emergency vet. And then they cremated her. Oh God, I still remember like watching them take her away and just like, I remember like crying, me like she was perfect. She was like, how am I ever gonna find that perfection again, right? And they took her and cremated her, and it was actually one of our friends who said, why don't we have a funeral for her? Like why don't we bury her and do something? And we did, and I took her ashes, buried her in her favorite spot in my backyard, put a maple Japanese maple tree on her, which is like, you know, it's a Japanese type of dog. Tree. And yeah, you've seen it. It's like this little tree in the middle of nowhere in my backyard, and said a few words and lay her to rest there. And then I got a tattoo of her on my side, and so she could always like be with me, you know. And she always is. She's like this my spirit animal. Like she was always just like, you know, my source of strength and always like a part of me. So just like the idea that she wasn't there, you know, I really needed to have this kind of like closure of memorializing what she meant. So I found that to be hugely helpful, all those different ways of like keeping her.
Yeah, I think, it was a struggle for me because I rent a place and so does Jason, and the only place we had that Scipio lived was Paul, so I'm not going to go spread our ashes on his house. So,
there's no right or wrong way to do it, I guess. Like, however people, like your pillow, like any way that you...
But you did it in a beautiful way. Especially that Japanese maple with like the red leaves and the white fur. It's just a really beautiful image. And, and you were telling me, the other day that you had this experience with a shaman and you were, and the point was to find your spirit animal.
Power animal.
And it was a white wolf. So that's cool.
That's
Mine's
a whole
probably
other topic.
Tiger.
It's just like there's just some kind of symbolism with it, and a grief that was new to me. I've grieved my father before and other things, but that was a different kind of grief. It felt like particularly painful, especially because they're just so integrated with your day-to-day life in a way that a lot of people can take for granted. Like I remember the days after walking into an empty house where I was used to having, Maya come up to me or at least like be there, right? It's just suddenly like your everyday movements, right, are different, and you feel the void. And I do remember a good friend of mine texted me and said, people might dismiss or downplay like losing a pet, but I know how painful it really is, and it's one of it's a really uniquely painful experience, and I'm so sorry. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Like I felt kind of silly for like I didn't lose a family member, but I did, and to say like I lost a pet doesn't really communicate like how much of a loss it actually feels like. So
an unconditionally loving companion who is just always a source of positivity. Except when they're like annoying, but being annoying isn't the worst. That's not a hurtful thing. And you finding her in such a disturbing way, and it's being so unexpected and sudden and undignified, like you said. That's just a whole, I'll give it to euthanasia. It's a good and dignified death. It really just looks like he just fell calmly asleep, and I was able to hold him, and I'm really grateful for that. I wish I had been able to keep calm in his last couple of moments so that he wouldn't be stressed, but I don't know. I think, what you were saying too about the perfection, like she's so perfect. How am I ever going to get... I know I would have been just as sad with a less beautiful cat, but the fact that Scipio is in his prime and just a gorgeous cat, I felt like I had destroyed something that wasn't my right to destroy. Like I had destroyed a famous painting or something. And that's my problem with beauty, probably. But I'm just saying, like, that just was another piece. I was like, how could I do this? How could I destroy this, like, beautiful, beautiful animal who was so seemingly healthy and had such a unique personality? And then, the incredible emptiness and all the space I felt when I came home. I am so grateful I had another cat and that she stepped up to the plate. She became very affectionate, like, immediately. So that was really nice. But it's, and then we both lost our animals before their time, but people who lose older animals, I think there's a greater sense of peace, but there's also like a sense that you've lost something you've lived with for 15 to 20 years. Yeah. It's really become integrated into your life. And that's a whole other thing that, we can't necessarily speak to. I guess I had childhood pets that died that way. But, so we know, I guess research-wise, we know that animal deaths tend to hit children and the elderly the hardest because it's either the first experience with death or it's kind of a pile-on experience of death. Right. Yeah. And then there are ambiguous losses, like when a pet runs away, that it makes it comes with a lot of guilt and regret and a lot of confusion and not knowing when to memorialize, not knowing when to call it, in a sense. So it's really legitimate. I wish we'd give ourselves like a little bit more peace about feeling this grief, I guess. And also like recognizing that, society doesn't give days off for it, and there is almost this like expectation that you go over it quickly, and I kept being like, why am I not still crying? Like, it's only day 5. Like, why have I stopped crying about this? And being really frustrated with myself. And I don't know. I would just swing wildly between those two poles until enough time passed where now I'm like, I cry when I think about him and I don't when I don't. And that's just how it is, I guess.
Yeah. So I think, like, in terms of, like, what to do and tips, I mean, I think, we've integrated a lot of it in our stories, but if you have, like, a loved one who's lost a pet, or if you lost a pet, I do think that at least recognizing how legitimate it is, right? Like, recognizing that it is grief, trying not to minimize it by being like, it's just a dog, get another one, right? Like, I sometimes, like, knowing that I gave her a good life is relieving, but sometimes it wasn't that comforting, because I was like, I could have given more. So I would say that's the wrong thing to say, but I would just, if you've experienced a loss or someone else has, just, like, treat it as, like, a real grief. Like, treat it as someone has lost a part of themselves, or they've lost a family member, and encouraging ways to memorialize or, make meaning out of it, like, gifts or, rituals or, nice letters or nice words of closure.
I will say another note on that, on meaning. So one, I'm just realizing now that you had said that she had this undignified death that was so incongruent with her dignified burying, but you gave her a really dignified burial, like with the beautiful tree and the burial and the nice words. And so it was a way to bring dignity back. And I think for me, I found meaning in being more committed to animal causes. Like I'm more vegan than ever, I'm really trying to figure out how to incorporate fostering and adoption and, like, environmental practices in. And so that, I guess, for me is Scipio's legacy. And for anybody else, it might just be getting another pet or not getting another pet. I mean, whatever the case may be. But I do think that meaning can be a great way to get rid of some of that guilt and regret.
Yeah. I did get a, thank you for saying that, by the way, that dignified funeral. I think that rings true, and it's comforting. I know that it might be too soon for some people, and that's totally fair, but right after, one of my coping mechanisms was getting another dog, getting, like, 2 other dogs with my ex-husband. It was good and distracting. I was still in my grieving process, so it was kind of complicated, but I did find it helpful. to just not come home to an empty house and to, like, really commit to being, to giving other dogs a great life. And I have a new pet, Mindy, who is, like, living her best life, just in Maya's
slightly
shoes.
Less dignified.
Slightly less dignified, but, it's a lot of couch sitting, a lot of luxuriating, so... I feel like she's following in her predecessor's footsteps pretty well.
Totally. Yeah, and for me, I'm like, okay, if Scipio had to die young, like, I can give another cat a life that may have been put down. And so, but other people are like, I can't replace my cat, and that's fine too. So, anyway, any last words?
No, it's just we will link the paper that we've been talking about. It was a really good one. It was a nice review of the process of losing a pet. It's called The Literature Review, Pet Bereavement and Coping Mechanisms by Rachel Park and other authors. So, but yeah, I would just say, if you have lost a pet, I would say, like, just give yourself that space to grieve, and if it means getting support, getting therapy, treating, more, memorial services, or just, like, treating your grief as real is our bottom line.
And be compassionate with yourself. That's been my hardest struggle, is thinking of all the things I could have or should have done, but you can't. And so now you know better, and you can take care of the next one better if that's what you choose to do. Well, I'm glad we did this episode, because I think it also goes along with the idea that these animals are important to us, and that grieving them and acknowledging the loss is important. And it's a really big factor in mental health. So this one is dedicated to Scipio and Maya. And if you're not an asshole, you'll give both Skippy and Maya 5-star ratings, one for Apple Podcasts and one for Spotify, and a nice little comment. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.